I am often asked why I bring up Doom so much. 20 minutes later, I am often asked to stop. I suppose this video could be considered a response to the question, and a way to avoid annoying people in the future regarding the subject. My story with Doom starts somewhere before I was even 12. At the time, I spent a lot of my free time playing on free flash game websites, one of which you might have heard of before was indeed Miniclip. One game I played on that was that of Alien Hive. It's a first-person shooter where the aim is to clear out each level of all the aliens. At least, that's what it used to be, seeing as how there is no way to play it anymore. This game shares the same inevitable fate of many, if not all online web games, if nothing is done to preserve them. A topic for another time, however. The game wasn't any good, honestly. There were only two variations of the same alien, one of which that can move faster than the other one. Each level is made out of single rooms with no branching paths. Enemies lack any challenge or strategy, opting to slowly clamber their way towards you. There are what looks like collectibles that add up to your final score, which is inconsequential. Slimy green goo which acts as an obstacle to avoid. All of this is pretty much obvious from watching this footage. What you see is exactly what you get. There clearly wasn't at all much desire to develop or polish this game beyond the bare minimum. Of course, this didn't matter to me at the time. And besides, for a web game you could play for completely free, there were worse options. At least they had a few other weapons, like here. Here's a shotgun. It seems to be the only other weapon available. Oh wait, nope, I was wrong. See, right there, there's also dual pistols, which are treated as a different weapon from the standard pistol. So I guess they're less of alternate weapons and more just power-ups. The game was clearly flawed, but this was well before I developed any form of critical thinking. I saw aliens. I had a gun. Call me hooked. The explosive barrels packed a cool punch too. I played a bit. I can't say I was too into it, but I do remember getting to the final boss and beating it. Or maybe it was my brother who beat it, and I watched as if I earned a victory for myself. It wasn't until my father saw me playing it that he remembered about Doom, and told me about it. A number of inconsecutive days passed and I'm still playing flash games. Thinking back to my past, I really could have used another hobby. Every teacher's worst nightmare back in the early 2000s, OneMoreLevel.com, had a steady stream of all sorts of flash games being added every week or so. And wouldn't you believe it, there was this little game that felt very familiar right in the front page only a week or two after I was told about it. I immediately clicked on it just to see what it was about. First thing that struck me about this game is that, unlike Alien Hive, I am still able to actually play it in 2020 because it wasn't taken down. So that's already a point up for Doom. Jokes aside, you can definitely see the similarities between these two games, but something about Doom certainly stood out much more to me. Rooms were massive and colourful, enemies varied greatly from each other, the weapons you carried distinct and unique, front and centre of the screen, interactions with the world, buttons and mismatched walls revealing hidden secrets, later levels becoming more elaborate and complex, the old school MIDI sound effects integrated well with the design and style. Of course, little of this really mattered to me at the time as well. There were aliens. I had a gun. That was enough for my primordial merriment. It wasn't until I grew older that I could truly appreciate the groundbreaking technology and brilliant level design on display here. Now, before I go any further, I should mention that for some reason, it is insanely hard to explain how this game is in any way groundbreaking to an average Joe on the street. Sure, most of you watching this may already know everything about this game and what impact it's made on gaming, but it should be important to note that you shouldn't go into this video for me to tell you anything you haven't heard of before regarding Doom. Rather, you should consider this video more of a retrospective and a way for people who have no idea what a Doom even is to get introduced to it. Surely you've met a person like this before. People like Lewis from work. That's right, I'm calling you out, you ungrateful felon. The thing is, how do I even do that? How do I convince the unenlightened of this world that this piece of software is worth their respect? Well, let's start simple. Watch this for a moment. If that didn't feel satisfying to you, then I've got bad news for you. You won't really like this game much. I'm sorry, but it's true. I recommend going to a doctor to get those dopamine levels checked. Though if you're not a strange person, you would have looked at this and thought, yeah, that did feel satisfying. Then good, you're going to love this game, because that's what the game's all about. If you look at this and ask yourself, why does this game look like an ugly cardboard dumping ground? That's because this game does indeed look terrible. I know it's hard for you people, but you're going to have to use your imagination for this. Imagine living in the year 1993, and the best looking video game for PC was this. Doesn't look so bad now, does it? There was truly nothing like it at the time. The only reason it looks terrible now is because we've been spoiled by the Hollywood-like status of recent technology. If you're willing to accept the game's gonna look a little rough around the edges, you can maybe then at least take note and appreciate on the fact that this game was the bridge between then and now in terms of graphics. Without Doom, you wouldn't have your Call of Duties, your Halos, your Fallout 76s, your Maddens, your Wallace and Gromit. It had to have started somewhere, and it all started with Doom. So you can at least have some respect for this game, knowing that all these modern video games you care about so much wouldn't be the way they are today without it. Maybe? I mean, probably. In fact, maybe there's an alternate universe where Doom never existed and games are all the better for it. That's a depressing thought. If you want something more specific on why Doom looks the way it does, then...
Instead, each level has been pre-compiled down into various pieces and stored in a binary space partition tree.
Bottom line, just respect your elders, kids. Not liking this game or completely disregarding it because it's old, rickety and cheap doesn't make it any less worth your time. That's like saying that Doctor Strangelove is a bad movie because it's old and has no colour, or that it's a mad world, yes, that is the name of the movie, is a boring movie because it's silly. I'm sorry, Kat, it has to be said. You're wrong, this movie is gold. I still love you loads, though. Anyway, what was I doing? Oh yeah, I was sucking Doom Guy's dick. I mean, I was made Romero's bit. I was talking about Doom. Yeah, I think that's what I was doing. In light of the previous point I made, graphics mean very little once you dig into a game's core mechanics and design. If you ever played a fighting game, whether it looks fantastic or marginally crummy, the moment you focus on the mechanics and gameplay, you don't entirely even notice the graphics after your first impression. Of course, this is true for all games, not just fighting games. It's just more apparent with fighting games. Like, and I don't mean to say that graphics aren't important, hence the whole Doom was kinda groundbreaking at the time rant I had a minute ago. My point is that who cares if Doom looks like a paper origami gone horribly wrong?
The game is fun. If it's not fun, why bother?
According to YouTube, I'm just about a good 3 years too late on posting this Reggie meme.
I understood that reference.
Playing this feels smooth. Well, it's supposed to. The version I'm playing online at the moment has a slight delay in whatever I input. About half a second, which is pretty dire. As impressive as this version is technically, being the entire shareware version of Doom converted into Flash, made by a certain mic, it doesn't utilise mouse aiming or mouse movement in any way. I have to resort to keyboard, which works, don't get me wrong. It worked for me back in the day and I remember being rather great at it. I can't say I remember the delay being as intrusive as I find it nowadays, but considering I never played Doom before this version, that's hardly a surprise. Besides, there is a way to mitigate this. If you just go to the options menu here and go to screen size, there we go, the way Doom was always meant to be played. Actually, there's still a delay. Must be connected to the internet speed. With that, or it's just a shoddy port. In all fairness, this is an old version of Doom that has since been updated on Newgrounds alongside 2 other games using the same engine, so the delay is resolved in that version. This Mike fellow did an amazing job with this, and if it weren't for him, I probably wouldn't love this franchise the way I do today. I highly recommend checking out his triple pack he has on Newgrounds here. If Doom doesn't do it for you, there's 2 more legendary games to try out as well. They're completely free demos, so there's little reason not to give them a shot. As much as I respect Mike and his work on the Flash ports, it isn't how I prefer to play Doom these days. I've moved on, and there's plenty better ways to play it. More recently, it's just had a re-release on all the modern consoles, though if you want the authentic experience, look no further than the version on Steam. If you play that version... Oh, there's music? Oh, it sounds horrible. Turn that rubbish off. If you play this version ran through DOSBox, you'll definitely enjoy it enough. You won't have to deal with the dreaded delay anymore, and you can even have mouse movement. Though it's not exactly what you would expect mouse movement to be in a first-person shooter, despite that, it's still more than playable.
The heck, where is it? Is he really hurting me from up there? What a load of nonsense. Oh, are you kidding me? Forget it.
Nowadays I can rush through this game on the second to hardest difficulty with no problem. Despite the delay in the online version, I still managed to make it to the end in about an hour or so. Okay, the delay was just too much for me. I couldn't do it as much as I tried. I still beat it when I was young though. Back then, it gave me challenging experiences I still remember to this day. I still remember that feeling I had when I made it to the end for the first time, beating those large and imposing barons before going through a teleporter and getting shredded apart, only for the game to end to tell me to buy the other episodes. Or that time I panicked and accidentally chainsawed a barrel after absorbing every little bit of resources there were, leaving me weak and crawling through the level, knowing that any shot from an enemy could cut my journey short. I'll also never forget my dad's demoralizing reaction after telling him that. And how on earth could I forget the first time finding that secret level, found by an elaborate connection of buttons and hidden rooms leading to a hidden exit, surprising you with a brand new map to explore in, all the while that awesome MIDI soundtrack is blasting in the background? Yeah, I was joking about the music before. The music is pretty badass in this game. For a game made in 1993, as well as being groundbreaking, there's a lot here beyond the running and shooting. Secrets are cleverly placed, satisfying than ever to find in the way they reward you with ammo, health, weapons or power-ups, etc., and they only require a bit of intuition to discover. The design of each levels and the way they slope, curve, lift to change makes it perfect to discover plenty of hidden places. You'll often see rooms with enemies or items which appear inaccessible, and you'll often wonder if there's any way to actually get in there. Despite how much I can appreciate the level design, I know a lot of people are put off by it. I said before, each level gets more complicated as the game goes on, so it can get very confusing where to go or where you've even been sometimes, especially for a first playthrough. You just have to accept that trudging your way through the levels are part of the game. If it helps, a simple and quick press of the tab key can reveal a map that can easily help you out, and the colour of keys generally lead you to the correct path. Thankfully, learning these levels are very easy because each level is always distinct from one another, with a few exceptions. Once you played a level once, you should be able to play it a second time and breeze through it in a few minutes. I understand that this isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I feel like the people who dislike the maze-like design fail to mention that there is a reason levels are set out like this. It allows for things like hidden rooms, traps full of enemies, cover from enemy fire, things like that. The maze-like 3D design isn't used to pad out levels like many would claim. It's also the reason Nightmare difficulty is as difficult as it is from all the backtracking. That is nasty, man. Wow. But enough with all this technical guff. Let's talk about the fun stuff. But before I do that, let's improve on a few things. This DOSBox version is the closest you'll get to what most people experienced back in 1993. I think. That's great if that's what you're after, though with a great game comes a passionate fan base willing to integrate improvements. I love this game, but the low resolution and outdated controls do damper my enjoyment a little bit. If anything, it's certainly nostalgic of how I played it for the first time, but that's all it's got going for it. There's no way to change the resolution or controls to something I prefer, at least as far as I know. Maybe you could, but I couldn't find anything. The lighting is also a tad too dark for my liking, with no way to brighten it. Nothing a little source port can't fix. With a quick download, you can give your underground sewer cesspit a much needed makeover. Beautiful. This is how I play Doom. It even gives you full mouse look so you can look up and down. Just a quick warning though, once you go here, you can never go back. Not so tough now, are you? There's a lot of source ports to choose from, but out of all of them, I've chosen GZ Doom for its easy installation and how well rounded it is compared to the others. Not only does the source port give you a large selection of various resolutions compatible with your monitor, but it offers a hell of a lot of options for you to configure. Like, an insane amount. A ludicrous amount. More than any sane person will ever need. I love this, and if all the quality of life improvements weren't enough, it offers full-on mod support. More on that later though. Anyway, as I promised, let's talk about the fun stuff now. To me, what makes me love Doom so much is to do with 4 major factors. Number 1, weapons. What is a shooter without an assortment of guns? When you begin the game, you're armed with a handy pistol, effective enough against the weaker possessed hostiles, though you'll quickly find that it proves a tad on the weaker side against the demonic threats. Run out of ammo and you'll put the pistol aside to go all fisticuff with the demons. Not ideal, but a good way to show off if you're good enough. It won't be long before you come across your go-to good old reliable, arguably the most important weapon in the entire franchise, even more than the BFG. Yeah, I said it. The shotgun can be found as early as the first level if you know where to find it. You'll learn to love this weapon, capable of taking out multiple enemies in one shot, as well as the meteor ones in just a couple. Up close or far away, you can rely on this weapon in any situation. Make your way through the game and you may be teased with a certain item you can't quite get your hands on yet. You're left to make a choice whether you should try to find a way to it, or continue on without it. We all know what you're really going to try and do though. The chainsaw is as brutal as it is noisy. Whoa, why is it so loud? To this thing, shut up. Jeez, quiet down. It's the perfect tool to replace your fists, preserve ammo, and stun lock pinkies. You would be able to live without it, though you wouldn't be complete without it. Next up is what I like to call the washing machine of firing arms. Because it spins like one. The chain gun. This dealer of destruction dishes out devastating damage, demolishing the deprived, demonic, devil, doo-doo heads. As early as the second level, you'll be able to spew out consistent and quick blows to your unlucky foes, downing them all in seconds. You'll find this weapon to be useful in dealing with large groups in compact areas. Next up is the big boy, as dangerous to yourself as it is to your enemies. The rocket launcher, blasting out travelling projectiles capable of completely obliterating your foes from a direct hit. It largely plays a similar role to your chain gun, with the added benefit of taking out larger enemies quicker and all around being a more badass weapon. Next up is a weapon so powerful that you can't even obtain it from Doom's first episode. Usually hidden from plain sight, the plasma ray fires big blue bolts of energy that shred through your enemies, leaving little of them behind once you're finished. Even with its limited ammo supply, the destruction this instrument deals more than makes up for it. Even if it does look like a vacuum cleaner. Last but not least, is the largest devastator of them all. It needs no introduction. The BFG. The Big Favorable Gun. Only ever found in the most secret of areas. This behemoth can wipe out entire rooms of enemies with a single shot. Ammo is scarce and costly to fire, but there is no greater reward than to acquire the ultimate weapon. Were your enemies afraid? Armed with this, they will be. You couldn't ask for a greater selection of weapons. You'll be given them throughout the game at a good pace to keep things from getting stale, and get them even earlier than normal if you look out for the right secrets. You'll understand each weapon's role just from experimenting, thanks to all of them feeling incredibly satisfying to use. Minus the BFG though. I mean, it's fine, but for a weapon that can clear out rooms instantly, it sure doesn't sound like it'll do much compared to the other weapons. Other than that, and the fact that the Gauss cannon wasn't in the game because it doesn't exist yet, I have no problems with what we have here, especially when it leaves room for improvement in the future. Of course, I'm just talking about how the weapons function. How they interact with the world around them. That's half the battle. Number 2. Adversaries. See, I chose the word adversaries because it was the coolest word I could think of. Otherwise this section would be called something boring like enemies, monsters, demons, bad guys. How each demon behaves is just as important as how your weapons function. You're going to have to make smart and educated choices in what action you should take, just based on what type of monster you see. I suppose the same principles apply to everything, from what item you pick up to what weapon you're holding. Look, my point is that in a game as fast-paced as this, you're going to have to make do with what information the game gives you at every moment. None of that is more true than with the monsters you'll be facing. First threat you come across, assuming you're not playing the ultra-violence difficulty setting, is none other than the Zombie Man. What was once an ally to Earth is now a shadow of its former human self, possessed by the demon forces in order to assist them into dominating all of mankind. Easily dealt with, but often come in bundles. What they lack in power, they make up for in numbers. Underestimate them and you may be caught off guard from their hit scan weaponry. The creatively named Shotgun Guy is another possessed soldier you meet after the Zombie Man, but it's the first threat you'll be facing if you're brave enough for the ultra-violence difficulty setting. They behave similarly to the Zombie Man, but come packed wielding a shotgun and can take in more damage. Their distinct red and black colour scheme let you know to keep your distance and watch out. Prioritising them over most other mobs is preferred, though on the bright side they leave plentiful ammo for your shotgun once dealt with. Next up is the Imp. Being Hell's front line, you'll most certainly be seeing lots of them. Their fireballs will keep you moving and their sharp claws will shred you apart if you get too close. Their protruding spikes make them very easy to make out from a crowd. A single shotgun blast is usually enough to deal with one, but expect lots. Next up is literally a fast-moving vehicle. The Pinky is a fast-moving monster designed to pressure and corner you where it can inflict massive damage with their bite attack. They're noticeably much more meatier than most mobs, being able to take a direct hit from a rocket. Despite the lack of a ranged attack, they're quite annoying because they can easily impede your movement. The best way I could describe them is like... imagine, if you will, a brick wall, and imagine it approaching towards you very quickly. And also it has a mouth. Should you get cornered by two of them, you'll be lucky to get out. Geez, the more I go on, the more I sound like I'm trying to sell a product. I suppose in a way I am. This isn't even half the amount of enemies there are in the game, but I think this is a good enough spot to make my point. And besides, no use spoiling every enemy in the game for the few people who have never played Doom and aren't watching this video, people like Lewis from work. From just these 4 enemies, you can see a clear design that's gone into each one. They're very simple, there's no doubt about that. Put any of these 4 in a one-on-one scenario with you and there's just no competition. But put several of each one against you? Then the complexity starts building. Knowing how to effectively deal with each enemy in any room relies squarely on you being able to tell what that demon is and knowing the variants of each one. You might know how to deal with them individually, but do you know how to deal with 4 imps at once flanking you in the dark? Do you know how to deal with 4 shotgun guys behind 2 charging pinkies tanking all your shots? Do you know how to deal with 7 zombie men and shotgun guys spread out on different levels? It even goes back to what weapons you decide to use. Do you want to use the rocket launcher to deal out massive splash damage? Or do you want to switch to the chain gun because it's safer in a narrow and dark area? Or do you want to pull out your chainsaw to stun lock pinkies to preserve ammo? It's that sort of stuff. Complexity is in its numbers, and it's thanks to the simple design and silhouettes of each monster that gets you thinking what's the best way to get through. Smart enemy placement helps too. Number 3. World. When I say world, I mean aspects such as level design, lighting, platforming, how and where items are placed, secrets, etc. The area in which you play and how you interact with said area. Now I've already talked a bit about Doom's level design, so I won't go into too much detail, though I will say that Doom's world is just as important for you to consider in a combat scenario than choosing your weapon or what enemy to shoot is. How you approach enemies in a pitch-black, confined space is going to be much different from how you're going to approach enemies in a large open field with death pits on either side. It coincides with your selection of weapons and the variants of enemies. I hope this is all making sense, by the way. When you combine these three aspects together into a game and carefully consider every little detail of each one, it can give you a very satisfying and action-packed video game that has only really been topped by its own reboot as far as I can tell. I can't really think of another first-person shooter that's combined these three aspects so well since Doom. Unless you count the sequel, which just takes the mechanics of this Doom and goes all out with it. So for me at least, what makes me love Doom so much is the perfect balance between these three factors: weapons, adversaries, and world. And probably movement too. Most people would argue movement in this game is also an aspect that makes the game incredible, and I agree to an extent. There's a momentum and smoothness to your movement that no other game achieved at the time, and it certainly aged well. But when you break it down, there's barely anything notable to talk about when it comes to movement. Up, down, left, right, hold shift to do those faster. That's pretty much it. You can't crouch, you can't jump, though if you really wanted to, the GC port gives you that option. It completely breaks the game though, so keep that in mind. And when you add on mouse look on top of the already simple control scheme, a lot of that becomes even less important. An important aspect for sure movement is, but not as impactful as I find everything else. To me, what makes me love Doom so much is to do with four main... So, if it's not movement, what is the fourth aspect? Well then, James, what is it? James, tell us, James. Alright, calm down, I'll get to it. First of all, if you're watching this and you haven't played Doom yet, you're dead to me. Though you could redeem yourself by giving it a shot. You may be surprised from how much the game has to offer, and there's not a better time to get into the series with Doom Eternal around the corner. At the end of the day, if you want to play a badass and challenging game that balances these three aspects so well, just play Doom 2 instead. Doom has its place in history, but Doom 2 is where the series shined. Doom 2 took what made Doom great and added newer maps, weapons, bells and whistles. The developer, id Software, learning the lessons from developing the first game and having a better understanding of the engine, really set Doom 2 apart from its predecessor. There's just no contest in which is the overall more fulfilling experience. Now I won't talk about Doom 2 too much, as I plan a playthrough with Gamebreaker Milt, and here I go again, bringing up his channel. This is like the 7th time, no more shoutouts for you, mister, you've had enough. But yeah, because I know he's watching this, to save spoilers, I won't talk about it much. All I'll say is that it's a fantastic game that easily surpasses the first game, as good as that one is. Mind you, with a few hiccups. I will mention that it does add one new weapon to the mix, the so-called super shotgun. It's really... I mean, it's really... It's really... It's real... Yes. Could you guys, like, give me 5 minutes? Anyway, sorry for holding this off, I'll get on with the last thing now. In all honesty, number 4 has very little to do with the previous 3 in a gameplay sense, though I still believe it to be one of the most important aspects of not just this game, but the whole franchise. And it's been staring at you in the face this whole time. It's nice that id Software acknowledged the Disembodied Head fanbase. I appreciate that. This feature is so brilliant. I have no idea how to even properly describe this. You know, on the surface, seeing the main character's disembodied head in the status bar is very odd. I mean, could you imagine if every FPS after Doom had this feature? There'd just be a random dude's head on the corner of the screen or something. It would be incredibly awkward and probably just clutter up screen space. Despite that, I think this is a feature worth implementing and experimenting with. Obviously, I'm not saying every game should have it. Some games just wouldn't fit this feature in a thematic sense. And I know there is games other than Doom that have had a face in the corner representing what state you're in, but even then, they don't really experiment or play with it any further than what Doom already came up with. I love this feature so much because not only is it an easy to understand method of letting the player know what condition they're in, but it quite literally tells a story. At every moment you're able to see your character's face react somewhat appropriately to whatever you're doing. From the moment you start, the Marine will tentatively survey his surroundings, similar to what a new player would be doing if they were to ever play this unfamiliar area for the first time. Even then, there's a confidence in his expression, a fearlessness that in turn helps the player push forward. Holding the fire button makes the Marine frown in disdain, presenting not just his hatred for the monsters, but a neat indicator of the incredible power of his guns as he barely manages to hold the beast as he fires them. As the Marine takes damage, he'll tense up in pain, grunting as he fights through the agony, all the while turning his head to indicate where the impact originated. The Marine's condition will worsen as his health degrades, his weak and defeated expression conveying the desperation the player feels when carefully searching for a health kit. At the cusp of death, all it takes is one stray bullet for him to let out one last horrific scream. Do you see why I like this feature now? This puny pixelated picture gives this game so much personality, and connects you with this character in a way that it wouldn't have achieved any other way. There's a reason the Doom fanbase refers to this character as none other than Doomguy. As unoriginal as this is, it still means a lot that he even got a name in the first place, and I believe it's all to do with this little face at the bottom centre of the screen. If you're still doubtful on a future game having this certain feature, then let me give you an example of how a game could implement this in a way that doesn't feel forced or out of place. Lots of people want an Iron Man game, right? Okay, a good Iron Man game. Could you imagine if they implemented a face view of the character inside the helmet? Seeing as how all the Iron Man movies have this helmet view, it's a perfect fit and I couldn't really imagine an Iron Man game without it. I have loads of ideas for a feature like this, but let's not lose focus here. Now, this is all probably sounding quite silly to the people who have played Doom before. They're all probably thinking, there is no way that this face is the reason this game is brilliant. Well, yeah, hence why it's one of the 4 reasons why I think it's brilliant. Doomguy alone isn't the reason I and many people love this game. It's how Doomguy interacts with his weapons, adversaries, and the world around him. If Doomguy hadn't have been there, it would have been just another self-insert character that many FPS games like to do, and it wouldn't have worked nearly as well if it went that route. He's a gaming icon, being remembered more than ever now thanks to the 2 most recent games continuing this trend, though not through his face expressions, but more than making up for it through his actions.
Carefully release the hinges.
For the record, in case anyone thinks I'm talking about this just because of the Doomslayer, I thought of all of this well before Doom 2016 even came out and further characterised the main character. I keep coming back to the original Doom games. Their level design alone lends itself to multiple different playthroughs with all the secrets and items to find, though at a certain point, after you've played the same game over and over again, you wish you could spice things up a little bit. Nothing the community can't solve. I'm not entirely into modding myself, but goodness gracious me. I cannot, for the life of me, deny the impact Doom has had on the modding scene. You got new maps, new weapons, new enemies, new sprites, new art, new graphics, more options, gameplay changes. Stupid stuff. This exists. Someone made this. Chances are, if there's some aspect of Doom you don't like, there's a mod for it. Find the gameplay too basic? There's a mod for that. Find the weapons too weak for your liking? There's a mod for that. Find that Doom isn't sexy enough for you? There's a mod for that.
It's a good day to die.
Maybe one day when I have more free time on my hands, I'll try and get more into the modding scene for Doom. I have a lot of respect for the people who take time and effort to make these insanely fun mods, completely for free, mind you. I haven't really tried them out though, as much as I want to. That is... except for one. So there was this little mod that came out called Brutal Doom. It made headlines when it was finally released, and it's... rather well made. I downloaded the Project Brutality mod pack, which uses the Brutal Doom mod for the basis and adds a few other mods on top of it, and it's... quite unmannerly. So yeah, if nothing I said before has convinced you to play Doom, maybe this will. I do have a few grievances with this mod pack though. Ah well, I can't complain too much. This mod does allow me to flip off a cyber demon after all.
Fuck yourself!
Oh, so yeah, Doom is awesome because it gives you tons of different ways to play it, thanks to the amazing community keeping this game alive and relevant to this day. Sorry, talking about Project Brutality made me nearly forget what my original point was. I can't help it, it's just that much fun. Here's the thing about Doom. I haven't even gone over a quarter of the things I could bring up. To go over something as basic as how the game was developed, and the people responsible would require its own in-depth video. Even Doom's graphics and rendering technology deserves its own in-depth video. You know, this is the sort of video game we're talking about here. It's a game that's just recently had its 25th anniversary, and it's still relevant. I'd argue the technology this game developed, along with the impact it's had on the gaming industry, is second only to the Quake series, which in itself is its own can of worms I'm not prepared to get into right now. But we wouldn't have gaming as we know it today without the Doom series pushing the technology further than any game has ever done to this day. And all it took was a bunch of ragtag teenagers, a couple hundred gallons of whatever the 90s equivalent of Monster Energy was, a crazy guy with long hair, some random nerd that totally isn't important anymore, and some very impressive technical wizardry. You could talk about Doom forever, but this video is more of a retrospective, so I won't do that. It's amazing to think about how far this franchise has gone since it came out back in 1993. Despite me being born 4 years after it came out, and a further 11 to 12 years for me to finally play it for the first time, it's given me nothing but pure, unadulterated, unapologetic, gory fun. I can see the quality and the passion gone into every single game, minus the RPGs. I've never really played them, maybe another time. And dare I say, This is one of the greatest, all-time franchises to ever exist. That's a bold statement, but I can't think of any other franchise that respects itself as well as its fan base and offers this amount of unprecedented polish and quality. My only fear now is that I hope the franchise doesn't peak at Doom Eternal and there's nowhere to go from there. I'm sure whatever the future holds for Doom, hell isn't going to be part of it.